The Detroit News has a very significant report just crossing tonight that I want to share with you, just coming out, saying that then President Trump is actually recorded on tape. And he is recorded on tape pressuring two Republican members of the Wayne County canvassers, most populous county in Michigan, not to certify the 2020 presidential election. Now, this is a phone call, according to a phone call on November 17th, 2020. Trump is on the phone call, right? So Trump's on the phone call with just people certifying an election in a state. And he's telling the two Republicans that they'd look, quote, terrible if they signed the certification, adding, quote, we've got to fight for our country. We can't let these people take our country away from us. Later saying you'd take care of lawyers for them. According to this report, which is just breaking, the chairwoman of the Republican National Committee, Ronna McDaniel, was also on the call and then told the two canvassers, quote, if you can go home tonight, do not sign it. We will get you attorneys. And that's when Trump replied, quote, we'll take care of that. Craig Mauger, who broke this story, is for the Detroit News, joins me on the phone. Craig, I just had a chance here to read this as this is crossing your breaking news. I just want to emphasize here, this is, at best time, the President of the United States on tape, recorded for 4 minutes of a longer exchange, talking, pressuring these individuals. You've heard much of this tape. Can you tell us what you hear Trump say?
What I heard listening to the audio of this conversation was the then President of the United States encouraging, pressuring, contending, arguing in favor of these two Republican county canvassers not signing the certification of the 2020 election for Wayne County. Wayne County is a Democratic stronghold in Michigan, and it's the state's largest county as well.
So is there anything else, that could have happened in the other minutes of the call, or how are you aware of exactly how long the call was, or anything else that you may not have heard that could, change the context here or add context?
We heard 4 minutes of what could be an up to 11-minute call, according to Verizon phone records that were previously obtained by the January 6th committee. We don't know what was said during the entirety of the call. We do know that the Wayne County canvassers have previously, the two Republican Wayne County canvassers, have previously said that the call was simply just Donald Trump thanking them for their service on the canvassers and nothing. They have said previously that they didn't remember anything specifically being stated about the 2020 election. They didn't remember that. The recordings that I have reviewed show that the call was heavily about the 2020 election and very much about the certification vote that had just taken place.
Right, and telling them not to certify. I mean, it is pretty stunning. And again, that the President of the United States is on the call. How did the canvassers respond to Trump? I know you're saying that they say retrospectively that they didn't remember 2020 being a big part of the call. Clearly, in the 4 minutes you heard, it was what the call was about. How did they respond to him?
They didn't say a lot on the call, on the recordings that I was able to review. They did not say a lot. I think what they did say was try to argue in favor of what they had just done. If you go back to November 2020, what happened during this very contentious canvassers meeting where the Wayne County results were certified is the two Republican canvassers initially voted against certifying. There was immense pressure put on them. There were lots of arguments made from members of the public and public comment encouraging them to certify, and eventually a deal was brokered. The Republicans agreed to certify the election, vote to certify it, if they could also demand an audit be done of the election. So with that deal, they voted to certify the election. However, after casting that pivotal vote, they left the meeting without signing the statement of votes, confirming what the vote tallies were in Wayne County. After they left the meeting, that is when the phone call with the then president and Ronna McDaniel, the chairwoman of the Republican National Committee, took place.
I want to ask you one other thing, Craig, before you go, and that is just listening to it. What was Trump's tone like when he's talking to them and pressuring them in this moment? How would you interpret sort of the tone in his voice, his emotion in it?
I would say it was an appeal to these canvassers. It was a direct appeal to them. He made a lot of comments that were similar to other comments that he had made, unproven claims of fraud in the election, arguing that there was something extremely improper that happened in Detroit, Michigan's largest city. he was kind of making a lot of the same arguments he had unleashed on social media, but in this situation, he was making them directly to these canvassers, basically and directly asking them, how could you sign this, knowing what I'm telling you? How could you sign it? And the comment that you mentioned earlier really struck me, where the president of the United States, told these two county canvassers that they would look terrible if they signed this, according to their recordings.
Yeah, I mean, it is important just to think about it, right? They're getting a call, two canvassers in Wayne County, Michigan, from the president of the United States, and just the power disparity, the way they would have felt getting such a call, the pressure in that in and of itself. Craig, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing all this reporting, and I hope everyone will go see Craig's full reporting in the Detroit News. Professor Laurence Tribe is back with me now. So, Professor, what do you take away from all of this? You're two, GOP Wayne County canvassers. They get a call. Ronna McDaniel from the GOP RNC hooks them into the President of the United States. And now Craig's had an opportunity to hear this call and a very clear, direct appeal from the president to two county-level employees telling them not to certify the election.
Well, assuming it's all accurate, and I just heard this for the first time, so I'm not going to make a final judgment about anything. But assuming it is what it appears to be, it makes you think of all the pressure and defamation directed at Shea and Ruby Moss. It makes you think of the Raffensperger call, where he's trying to twist arms and say that you're going to get in trouble unless you find me the votes I need. This is all part and parcel, it appears, of an extended plot going back way before January 6th and extending right up until the violent insurrection, an attempt to interfere with the central process of democracy, the process of making a peaceful transition to the newly elected president. And I can imagine whether Special Counsel Jack Smith already has this evidence or is in the process of developing it, that the trial we're going to see that is supposed to begin on March 4th is going to be dynamite. No wonder the president wants absolute immunity. No wonder he wants to delay the trial. No wonder he wants to prevent the American people from learning the details of how he tried to steal an election that he had lost in the name of what he calls the big steal.
Marshall has done extensive reporting on these canvassers. Ryan Goodman is on the phone as well. But Marshall, these canvassers, you have reported extensively on this, and you knew that there was a recording. We're now finding out what was on it, and you hear the President of the United States on it. You hear, at least Craig Mauger was saying he heard 4 minutes, which included the President of the United States speaking. Can you put this in context for us?
Yeah, we knew that there was a phone call. This is the first time we're actually hearing what was exactly uttered on the call, thanks to this great reporting from the Detroit News. Put yourself in these people's shoes. They are local county canvassers, local folks in Detroit, getting a phone call from the President of the United States, the highest office in the land. This is unprecedented, and it was at a moment in time when Donald Trump was trying to do everything in his power to stop the certification of the results in Michigan. He lost by over 100,000 votes in that state, but he was trying to find any lever of power that he could find to stop it. He had invited the top state officials to Washington, met with them in the Oval Office, the head of the state House and state Senate, both Republicans, to try to twist their arms. They ended up putting out a statement saying there was not massive fraud. And then he went lower on the totem pole and went to these local officials, got them on the phone, convinced them look at these quotes, convinced them to rescind. He said, we'll take care of that. Ronna McDaniel from the RNC, do not sign it. We'll find you attorneys. Don't do it. They ended up trying to take back their votes. It was too late. They voted to certify the results. But it just shows how Trump tried to find anybody, anywhere, who could gum up the works and overturn a lawful election.
Tonight, we begin with a bombshell from the Detroit News. They've got new reporting about Donald Trump and alleged efforts to overturn the 2020 election in the state of Michigan. The paper reports that Donald Trump himself personally called two members of the Wayne County Board of Canvassers and pressured them not to certify Joe Biden's win. Republican National Committee Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel was also reportedly on that call. The Detroit News reached out to Trump, McDaniel, and the canvassers, and none of their spokespeople disputed this account. The paper says the audio was captured by someone present for the conversation between Trump and the canvassers. The Detroit News obtained the audio through an intermediary who heard the recordings but was not present for the calls. NBC News has not heard or verified these recordings, but earlier tonight, the reporter on this story broke it down to my colleague Ali Velshi.
It was laying out the arguments that the then president had been making on social media repeatedly about Wayne County's election, making them over the phone directly to these two county election officials, telling them, as you just said, that they would look terrible if they signed the certification, arguing with them, how could you sign this knowing that there are more votes than there are people in Detroit, which is a claim that is not accurate. But that was a claim he made on the call with these two Wayne County canvassers, and having the chairwoman of the Republican National Committee joining in the pressure to try to get these two individuals not to sign this document.
Oh, heavens, we've got a lot to dig into there. But also tonight, Donald Trump is ramping up his offensive against the Colorado Supreme Court ruling that booted him from the state's primary ballot under the Constitution's insurrection clause. Yesterday, Joe Biden said it was self-evident that Trump is an insurrectionist. And this morning, no surprise, Trump posted on social media, quote, "I am not an insurrectionist." NBC News has learned Trump's legal team does plan to formally appeal the ruling with the U.S. Supreme Court sometime after Christmas, but before January 4th. Trump is using this case and special counsel Jack Smith's criminal cases, no surprise, to boost his campaign funds. This afternoon, he sent supporters a fundraising video which blasted Smith and trying to tie the DOJ prosecutors to President Biden.
It's called election interference. The sitting president is attempting to subvert the will of the American people to remain in power for 4 more years, which will totally destroy our country.
If you're familiar with that, it is because that is exactly what Donald Trump is accused of doing.
Longtime viewers of this show are no stranger to the disgraced, twice impeached, 4 times indicted ex-president saying the quiet parts out loud. It's basically Donald Trump's calling card. Back when he was in office, Donald Trump saying the quiet parts out loud often meant speaking in code, using dog whistles, telling the Proud Boys, for instance, to stand back and stand by, or saying there are good people on both sides after white supremacists marched through the streets of Charlottesville chanting, "Jews will not replace us." But now? Well, now Donald Trump has dispensed with the dog whistles. He's just going for it. Now, as a rule, we don't air video of Donald Trump lightly on this show, but we thought it was important that you hear this, that we all bear witness to what the ex-president and current leading Republican candidate is saying here.
We were like a rocket ship. It was like a rocket ship sent by Kim Jong-un, just like that. Who was very nice, I will tell you. He's not so fond of this administration, but he's fond of me. And we had a very good relationship. Vladimir Putin of Russia says that Biden's, and this is a quote, politically motivated persecution of his political rival is very good for Russia because it shows the rottenness of the American political system. Viktor Orban, the highly respected prime minister of Hungary, said, Trump is the man who can save the Western world.
Now, Donald Trump says a lot of crazy stuff at his rallies, and this rally over the weekend was no exception. But make no mistake, when Donald Trump uses his platform to give a big bear hug to the most ruthless dictators of the 21st century, Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, Viktor Orban, it's no accident. He knows what he's doing. He didn't just name-check the world's current cast of authoritarians and villains. Nope, he also nodded to the most notorious, bloodthirsty, depraved fascist of all time, Adolf Hitler.
We got a lot of work to do. You know, when they let, I think the real number is 15, 16 million people into our country, when they do that, we got a lot of work to do. They're poisoning the blood of our country.
They're poisoning the blood of our country. He's referencing undocumented immigrants. Now, Trump bad-mouthing undocumented immigrants is also absolutely nothing new. He's been doing that since the moment he came down the escalator at Trump Tower and claimed that Mexico was sending rapists over the border. But poisoning the blood of our country, it's an important turn of phrase that is sounding alarm bells for civil rights and extremist experts for a reason. In Hitler's manifesto, Mein Kampf, there are several passages in which Hitler used the words poison and blood in conjunction in attacking people that he deemed a threat to the purity of the Aryan race. He was mostly talking about Jews at the time, claiming that, quote, great civilizations of the past died out as a result of contamination of the blood, and linking the, quote, poison which has invaded the national body to an influx of foreign blood. And if you're saying to yourself, yeah, but Donald Trump wouldn't know that Hitler wrote that, Donald Trump allegedly doesn't even like to read. Well, it's worth remembering that, as the New York Times has reported, Donald Trump has long had a Hitler fascination. His bedside table once held a copy of Hitler's speeches, a gift from a friend, which Ivana Trump, his first wife, said she had seen him occasionally leafing through. During a trip to France in 2018, Mr. Trump reportedly told his chief of staff, John Kelly, well, Hitler did a lot of good things. He also reportedly complained to Mr. Kelly that American generals weren't as loyal as Hitler's generals, asking Kelly, quote, why can't you be like the German generals of the Third Reich? Now, echoing Hitler's talking points, praising fascist leaders, none of this is subtle, and none of it's a joke. It's all straight out of the dictator's playbook, and it dovetails with what he's already told us that he would do in a second term, including, quote, radically reshaping the federal government by purging potentially thousands of civil servants and filling career posts with loyalists. Nearly 20 current and former Trump aides told Reuters that, quote, Donald Trump in a second term would likely install loyalists in key positions in the Pentagon, State Department, and CIA, whose primary allegiance would be to him, allowing him more freedom than in his first presidency to enact isolationist policies and whims. Quote, the result would enable Trump to make sweeping changes to the U.S. stance on issues ranging from the Ukraine war to trade with China, as well as to the federal institutions that implement and sometimes constrain foreign policy. As the saying goes, when someone tells you who they are, believe them the first time. And Donald J. Trump is putting us all on blast about who he is and what he plans to do if he's reelected in 2024. And that's where we start this hour with the former United States Senator and co-host of MSNBC's How to Win 2024 podcast, Claire McCaskill, Protect Democracy co-founder and executive director Ian Bassin, plus with me at the table, the former congressman from Florida, David Jolly, and the Princeton University professor and distinguished political scholar, Eddie Glaude. Lucky for us, all are MSNBC political analysts, and welcome to you all. Ian Bassin, let me just start with you, because there are folks, you and I talked about this a couple weeks ago, there are folks who would say nothing much has really changed with Donald Trump. He is an extremist. He's been this way for a long time. What's the difference now that he's using words that Hitler used? We're not even 100% sure that he's doing it deliberately. What is the difference now? Why is it uniquely important for Americans to understand what he's up to and what he's saying?
Well, I think there are a couple of differences, Ali. One is when he did this during his first term and started introducing concepts that were wholly foreign to the American experiment of self-government for the last 247 years. First off, he didn't really have the apparatus to fully implement them. He had people in government who were brought in from prior Republican administrations who, in many cases, did enable some of his bad acts, but in other cases stood athwart of them. We learned that, for example, his White House counsel, Don McGahn, would run interference against him trying to get the Department of Justice to prosecute his opponents, although in some cases Trump still succeeded. What's different this time is Trump has learned. And this time he now has an entire apparatus outside of government that is preparing to fill the government ranks with loyalists who would simply carry out his wishes and are ideologically aligned to this dictator type agenda. And that's sort of the second thing that's different. Is the first time I think Trump was kind of out of right field in a way in terms of some of his anti-democratic activity. But in the last several years, an intellectual movement has begun to burgeon on the far right that is kind of filling in the gaps of Trumpism, providing an intellectual footing for it. You now have these movements on the far right that are calling for the end of the American liberal order and to replace it with something that looks much more authoritarian, even in some corners calling for an American Caesar to put it in place. So now it's not just one person who's sounding different. It's a movement that seeks to replace American democracy.
Eddie, I see you nodding your head here.
Yeah, I mean, there is a sense the first time around he's a rookie. Now he's a seasoned actor. And he's mobilizing all of those forces and resources across the country in order to, in some ways, execute what is obviously and seriously an anti-democratic project. I want to say that it's not wholly foreign to the U.S. Remember, Nazi lawyers in the 1930s are actually looking to American law, anti-miscegenation law, immigration law, as examples. Mein Kampf actually quotes the American project as an exemplary project. Remember in 1939 in Madison Square Garden, there's an extraordinary Nazi rally. So part of what Trump has done, he's tapped into a long-standing illiberal tradition in the United States and is exploiting it. So we need to see the newness of it, but also see what is actually quite familiar.
Claire McCaskill, it's possible, you know, when people say, well, why, did Donald Trump even read Hitler? Many of the recipients of his messages may not have read Hitler, but these things are tried and true. Phrases and behavior that is illiberal has worked around the world, as Eddie points out, historically. It's working around the world right now. This is the kind of thing that actually gins people up and gets them to support a guy like Donald Trump.
Yeah, Donald Trump is marketing grievance, and he's doing it with scary stuff. I mean, you listed some of the things, Ollie. He's also said that he wanted to terminate the Constitution. Those are his words, terminate the Constitution. And this language that he used, I will never believe that he doesn't understand the reference to poisoning the blood. And yes, he was referring to illegal immigration. And yes, we do have a problem at the southern border. But when you really step back and think about this, try this on for size. He's using a phrase that immigrants are poisoning the blood of a country, and he's married to an immigrant. And he is the father of the child of an immigrant, a first-generation immigrant. So when he does that, I hope all the Americans who understand that we are a country of immigrants are as offended as they should be over him using that phrase, which brings up horrific shadows from history that are something we should never allow to be repeat again.
David Jolly, one of the things that experts on this sort of thing, including Ruth Ben-Ghiat, bring up all the time is that if this were just Donald Trump, as Ian points out, if Donald Trump were just a fringy character on the side, that would be one thing. But A, he's not a fringy character. He was the president of the United States, may well be the president of the United States again. And Ruth's point is that the Republican Party, the current Republican Party, particularly the party in the House, enables this behavior. There are lots of exit ramps. There are lots of opportunities to say that was one too far. Tearing up the Constitution was one too far. Good people on both sides was one too far. He just keeps on going, and it's not causing anybody in the House to sit there and say, this is not who we are.
A leader without a follower is just taking a walk in the woods.
Right.
Right? He has followers, whether they're sitting in the United States Congress or they're at a rally in New Hampshire. And I think we have to have a cultural conversation, rip the veneer off this entire moment. And we almost do ourselves a disservice by bringing in the policies of immigration to this.
Which are valid and worthy of a different conversation.
Sure, and his immigration policies are hard-right, xenophobic, white nationalist immigration policies, standing alone as they are. What he expressed in New Hampshire and has expressed before is a racist statement. And it either reflects racism that he harbors personally in his heart or racism that he's willing to peddle for personal and political gain. And we should use that word cautiously, right? And in fact, it's probably thrown around too often. But to suggest that immigrants poison the blood, and he went on to suggest immigrants not just from South America, which, by the way, shows a significant ignorance of the actual border crisis originating from Central America, but he said it's not just South Americans, it's Africans and it's Asians. What Donald Trump said is a racist statement, and that becomes a cultural conversation for us. Are we going to elevate somebody that espouses such racist philosophy? And what if you're another Republican right now? Lindsey Graham on the talk shows on Sunday tried to say, I don't want to worry about what he says, it's what he does. No, you have to worry about what he says. Because this is akin to a Southern governor in the civil rights era saying, no, I support segregation, because we need to protect the white nationalist origins of the country. And to allow diversity actually poisons the American spirit and poisons our American identity. So for Nikki Haley, whose parents are first-generation immigrants, for Ron DeSantis, for Lindsey Graham, for the new Speaker of the House, for Mitch McConnell, all of you, join this cultural conversation whether or not we can elevate a racist to the presidency, because Donald Trump just told us who he is.
This better be critical, Wheelie.
Sir, come on, when is it not? Please. Okay, couple of things. I want to lower the double. I was thinking about taking a couple of months sick leave, maybe starting today. And oh yeah, I intercepted a transmission from Megatron.
Then send it through.
Yes, sir, right away, sir. And so I was so damn weird, going on the other stuff.
This is your last warning, insects. Relinquish what remains of the Allspark.
So who's the insect? You? What? Who's the insect?
Protect you. They were defeated on our world, and we will defeat them here.
This was just a diversion. Security, please bring up. Rabbit, she's already inside. Deeds! Give me an update on that reserve. Boss readiness. What was his name? What was it?
Evac, sir.
Evac.
She's right in front.
We're facing a heavy sustained attack. They appear to be after the Allspark.